talk about NC Wyeth today. I guess mainly, just some reportage about the recent market for this, uh, quintessential American illustrator and fine artist who just happens to be very important to southeastern Pennsylvania, Chester County in particular.
Yes. Yeah. A very notable Pennsylvania artist.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I thought we would maybe start with, just a brief little biographical background, and then kind of move into some activity that we've seen over the past, couple years, and yeah, and then just go from there. Make some observations, ask some questions, point out some mysteries, and yeah, and see what else happens.
A little bit of a deep dive, zoom in session for today.
Zoom in, yeah, deep dive, absolutely, yeah, yeah. So let's see here. Okay, well, Wyeth, he was born in Massachusetts in the 1880s, and he was, of course, there's like a whole Wyeth dynasty of artists. His son is arguably even more well known than he is, Andrew Wyeth. He of Christina's World. Um, and then his grandson, Jamie Wyeth, who was also a very important artist as well. I know the family was kind of, when they were his ancestors were like in Massachusetts from, we're talking like, not quite Mayflower times, but we're talking 17th century. Um, his mother was acquainted with like Thoreau and Longfellow. Um, and then the sort of Pennsylvania connection came in because once he decided to pursue art, he wanted to study with this one particular illustrator, Howard Pyle, who, by the way, is a very interesting, noteworthy artist in his own right. Howard Pyle, he had a sort of ran a school, an illustration school, um, and when one looks at like Pyle's works, I mean, you can see immediately like the influence that he had on Wyeth. It's like there's just there's something there, that's very like their colors or their palettes or something. It's very even just like compositions. There's definitely like a resemblance there. Um, but anyway, that's around the turn of the century, and that's when he moves to Chadds Ford, which is a sort of not even really a village. It's just like an area. It's like a crossroads area, more or less, in Pennsylvania. It's kind of between Westchester and Wilmington, Delaware. So it's, southeastern Pennsylvania. If you look at the map of Pennsylvania, the very corner is like this arc, this perfect semicircular arc, the border between northern Delaware and Pennsylvania. It's kind of like right along that arc, basically, that this is all happening. And that's the current location of the Brandywine River Museum, which still has a lot of excellent Wyeths, and I think they do tours of one of his houses or studios. Um, but anyway, just trucking along, he started to get like important commissions, illustration commissions, commercial commissions while he was still studying with Pyle. So like right away, like early 1902, 1903. And he's very, very interested in this point. He's very fascinated with the American West, very, very interested in like Frederick Remington, who he really is impressed by. And he does extensive travels in the West, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona. There's all these great, photos of him, photos that he took of like cowboys and of him like sort of on horses and wearing ridiculously bushy chaps and stuff, and looks great. But anyway, that's like his early focus. He's very interested. He's doing a lot of his earliest commissions are kind of like Western themed ones. I think his first real notable one, covers of the Saturday Evening Post. And he struggles with, I mean, obviously he likes, the commercial work, and he never really abandons it. And he does tons of commissions and, illustrations for magazines and books throughout his life. But he's also, really thinks of himself as like a fine artist, and never stops thinking of himself as such. And starting around when, kind of coinciding with when his illustration career, it really boomed around 1910, 11, because he got a ton of exposure from doing uh like illustrated children's classic literature, like Treasure Island, Robin Hood. There was like a series, I want to say Scribner classics. They did this whole series of classic books that he illustrated. But around that exact same time, I mean, he's also very interested in, um, in his letters he says impressionism, but he's really referring to like Pennsylvania impressionists, like the New Hope group. The who's that going to be, like Daniel Garber or Redfield? I don't know too much about the particulars of those relationships or anything, but those artists. Um, so for example, Freeman's has very really specializes in those particular artists, and they always have good sales of those New Hope artists. Um, so he's like, kind of getting a looser style around that time, and just kind of trucks on with his career. Scribner's, he works a lot for McClure's, which was the magazine. That's like the quintessential muckrackers magazine, right? That's the Ida Tarbell. These figures that are doing these, sensational, journalism, sort of journalistic renaissance in early 20th century. And he does a lot of murals, banks all around, Philadelphia, Boston, Delaware. He's friends with, he kind of enjoys a little minor celebrity. I know he was close with like F. Scott Fitzgerald, and like actors and actresses. Lillian Gish, I think, was a friend. Um, and just to kind of wrap it up, I mean, so towards the 30s, he starts to get experiment with other styles. So he's aware of like Thomas Hart Benton, Grant Wood, and he kind of experiments with like a really tight sort of egg tempera techniques. And he does a series of well, towards the end of his life, he's actually, he dies sort of untimely in a car accident, a really grisly one, in like 1945. And he has a bunch of work that's unfinished, to sort of commission for MetLife Insurance, actually. And some of those paintings, I think, were finished by actually Andrew Wyeth, who's really coming into his own by this time, the late 40s. That's when a lot of his classic works are really popping off. Um, but just to wrap up, I mean, NC Wyeth, he's got, a pretty active market. I mean, he's in collections of, lots of museums: Brandywine River Museum, the Farnsworth in Maine, the Portland Museum of Art in Maine. And yeah, and pretty, there's some, galleries and dealers that do actively have works available. There's several works come up every year at auction, so that's kind of what we were looking at here, as one of the more recent works, um, that he that sold, kind of a notable sale. This is a picture that was sold at Christie's just in January. And it's the figure with the green jacket and the gun is Wild Bill Hickok. It was part of one of the, I want to say William Koch is one of the lesser known Koch brothers, which, I guess that's a claim to fame. You're a lesser known Koch brother. If I were a Koch brother, I would rather be a lesser known one for sure. Anyway, yeah, so this one, I mean, this sold really well. It sold for about, 2.2 million. And it was, the thing about it is that it actually had sold, a couple years, not a couple years, about 10 years before, um, or no, excuse me, 20 years before, in 2007, it sold for the same amount, like 2.2 million, I think even slightly more, right? It was like 2.2 million.
A
And
little,
yeah,
yeah, a little bit more. Yeah, which is interesting because it shows kind of that long-term impact of the recession and Lehman Brothers and that whole mess.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Cause these are one of those markets that were always super conscious that that financial crisis, a lot, a lot of American art, you know, and brown wood stuff, more traditional type of art, has really struggled since then. I mean, obviously the notable stuff does well, but as a whole, it kind of a little bit depressed. But that sale, 2007 sale, was at Coeur d'Alene. Is it Coeur d'Alene or Coeur d'Alene? I don't know if I know, but
You're asking the wrong person.
I like to say Coeur d'Alene. That's what I feel. I feel like that's what a Frenchman would say, but let's see. Um, so that's interesting to note. That's that detail. Um,
Ready
yeah,
to move on to the next?
yeah. Let's take a look at the next one. All right, this was a work that actually the title of which is kind of long and boring, but it's from a it's from an illustration commission. This was actually bought in at Freeman's in a couple months ago, December. So it had a pretty, it's not a huge work. It's like 34 by 25. Um, and it's from 1911, from, right when he's like on the cusp of becoming, a very famous illustrator, and he's certainly known. And I don't know, it didn't sell. It's got a long title that's like, oh, he grabbed her hand and something, 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 like it's like a quote from whatever story it's from. Um,
I want to highlight the chicken. I think that it's such a great example of the impressionistic brushstrokes and how the detail, he focused on the leather jacket, the pattern on her jacket. You can see where the viewer's emphasis is supposed to be, but I'm intrigued by the stones that they're standing on and the chicken, which is like five brushstrokes basically, and yet that's a chicken.
and this, yeah, this stone building and those windows, the pathway, the door. I mean, this is all very reminiscent of like the Chad's Ford environs. It's like pretty. It's very rural. But it's very like kind of like old Pennsylvanian. So it really feels of its place to me. Yeah.
And yeah, that color of the winter light, even if they weren't wearing coats, you would know it's winter because that region has that color of light in the winter.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this one was offered in December 25 at Freeman's. I think it had an estimate of 70 to $100,000. Failed to sell. And there's a couple buy-ins that we'll look at here. But just one thing to note when examining an artist market. Not everything always sells, but yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay. This one is a Custer. This is that's this painting is of Custer. And that sold at Thomaston Place auctions in I think that's Connecticut somewhere, possibly Thomaston, Connecticut, for about 75,000. Not a lot. I think it sold along with it's pretty big too. It's like 45 by 57, so that's pretty big. Um,
I love how sketchy the foreground is. It almost looks like watercolor there.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. This one is a little funny. It almost has an unfinished feel. And there's also, we saw a fellow appraiser, an auction house, a gentleman affiliated with an auction house in Philadelphia, who was talking about a different Custer painting, whose attribution is a little in question, but that circulates on the market. So this one is, I think, agreed. This one is agreed to be by uh, by Wyeth. But there's when it comes to Wyeth and Custer, there's some intrigue afoot. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Oh, this one sold at the same sale, Thomaston Place. This is a scene. This is, image of somewhere in Pennsylvania, Chad's Ford. Sold for 37,000. Um, modestly sized, 21 by 25.
You can see the rocks in the landscape, the natural boulders coming out.
Exactly. Yeah. So this one kind of a almost just a pure landscape, right? So we're not really in the realm of illustration here, I don't think.
Yeah,
Um,
more in the painterly part of his identity, and you can see the house there in the corner.
absolutely. Yeah. But this one and the Custer one that we looked at before were both offered previously, like very recent, before they sold at Thomaston Place. The Custer one was offered December at Bonhams, Los Angeles, for and failed to sell in December 24. And this one offered actually earlier in 2025, I think at Bonhams as well, also bought in. So I don't know. Thomaston's got the magic touch, I suppose.
I think they're in Maine actually.
They're in Maine. Okay. Yeah, I apologize. I don't know where they are.
Maybe I might be
Still,
wrong.
there's a Thomaston, Connecticut. So that's all I know.
Maybe there's a big Thomaston clan. They settled all of New England.
Could be. Yeah. Could be. Yeah.
Yeah, and was this Wyatt's house or was it just somewhere in the Chadds Ford area?
I wish I knew. I don't know. Yeah. Be interesting to know.
Just I love how he does light.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. This was another interesting buy-in. I thought, yeah, I mean, maybe because it's a biblical theme. It's for some a commission for some sort of biblical tale, maybe for children, from around the late 20s. But it had a huge estimate, really high estimate, 250,000 to 400,000, which is pretty significant. It's that might be, I don't know, it might be one reason. I don't know if I were the Wyeth collector, I don't know if I would want a biblical one, a lesser known one. But for whatever reason that one failed to sell. That would have been, ooh, sometime in, spring or summer 2025 last year.
Yeah, because it's his Western themes tend to be some of the most popular themes among collectors.
Very true. Very true.
So having the biblical theme is somewhat limited in the collector base that would be actively looking for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now this one's a bit of a mystery, right? This is a most recently was offered at Bonhams here in New York. But this would have been about 2 years ago, November 2024, with a really big estimate, 1.2 to 1.8 million. And it's a tree, it's a boat, but I don't know. Well, it was previously sold like just a year prior at Freeman's for like $2.5 million. This painting of a tree, but I don't know. It was from it had a really interesting provenance because it was from a sort of prominent sort of New Jersey family, the Papa George family, who I don't know much about. But that's a crazy result. That's like that's a one of the top. I think that's the fourth. The 2023 Freeman sale of this painting for 2.5 million was like the fourth highest price achieved at auction for Wyeth. But then in a year later, November 2024, it didn't sell at Bonhams. So that's
It's
unfortunate.
also interesting that it came to market again so quickly.
That
That
is very interesting. Yeah, yeah.
that it wouldn't be held for longer.
So there's some mystery here. Who knows what it is? Maybe, if we wanted to get to the bottom of that, maybe we would call up our buddies at Freeman's or Bonhams. But I don't know. There's must be a story here. Yeah.
Yeah, a little sleuthing would be required to get to the bottom of that.
Maybe the owner just needed some dough really quick. Maybe that's all it was. But who
Mhm.
knows?
Who knows?
So I'm sure it'll come back soon, though. I'm sure it'll probably be offered again.
Yeah. Then we can do a follow-up.
Yeah, if there wasn't a private sale, but we'll see. Okay, yeah, and I wanted to just include some examples of posters, right? So this is one of the posters Wyeth did in his lifetime, that you see pretty commonly for the railroad, and these they sell it like Swan Poster Auctions International. And I mean, between sometimes two, three, four, five, $6,000 pop. I'm sure condition probably plays a big role there. So those appear somewhat frequently. Yeah.
I like this one.
Yeah, yeah, I wanted to include one of these pen and ink drawings. I think also sold at Swan. This one, January 2021. It's an illustration from I think Longfellow. This one sold for 10,000. And there's I think some others from this particular project. They're all seem to be between 4,000 and $11,000 or so.
Which
Uh,
I think is a very accessible
yeah.
collector price point where you could get, an original NC Wyeth.
Not only is it original, but it's also like, a lot of his final illustrations weren't pen and ink, so it's unique in that sense too, in his oeuvre, which plays a role sometimes. I think the uniqueness of what he does. I think when we see the next slide, that'll come into play. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm impressed by the detail in the material culture, how he has a chair with the details that would match the time period with the leaded window behind and just
Mhm.
kind of research that goes into being an illustration artist, which as you mentioned, he kind of, felt uncomfortable with that identity sometimes, but it takes a lot of research to get those details right.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I think he was the kind of guy, I think he loved the hustle of like the people calling him up and needing something quick. He loved that. He worked really fast, supposedly. And there was like supposedly he could do he worked a lot larger, I think, than a lot of other illustrators because a lot of his canvases ended up being, 30, 40 inches each. And that's the size that he liked to work on. And obviously it would be reproduced smaller. And he would supposedly bang those out in just like a few hours, start to finish, like conceive it, compose it, paint it, and I don't know if he's working for models for every single one. Certainly some photographs. There's pictures of him dressed up, in photographs that he was probably then using as references. But I mean, I know he like used kind of stock buildings in the background, like like he just kind of knew how to do certain things. Um, so he enjoyed that part, but I think he liked the more the gravity of being a fine artist, I think, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And it actually, that's a really interesting point you made about the larger than usual size that he made the illustration art at, which would then be reproduced much smaller for inclusion in whatever publication it was in, because
Mhm.
details actually, sharpen through that.
Yeah,
You can get away with being much looser and more impressionistic when the final printed size is going to be substantially smaller.
very much so. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. All that little hatching gets even finer. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So so now we're going a little further back in time, and we're making a jump to a couple paintings that are really represent the sort of auction records, the high auction sale records for Wyeth. And this is the number one high selling NC Wyeth painting of all time. It's called Portrait of a Farmer from 1943. It's 40 by 60, which is on the large side for him. It sold for just shy of $6 million with the fees included, and that sale was in May 2018. So post financial crisis, but pre COVID. And the unique thing about this one is everything we've been looking at so far, with the exception of the pen and ink, was oil on canvas, and this one is egg tempera, right? Which his son Andrew Wyeth would go on to really really specialize in, and a lot of his well known stuff. But around this time, late 30s and stuff, Wyeth NC was really looking to things like Thomas Hart Benton, and in particular Grant Wood.
Mhm.
Uh, so he's kind of trying, this sort of American regionalist stuff. So just kind of taking a page from that, and he's going in this direction. And so it's a bit of an anomaly that his top selling work of all time is this egg tempera one, whereas he's you know known for slightly different things. And you can see, looking really closely at this, at say the fence posts, you can see how that makes a bit of a difference. There's a different type of detail in these. Um,
Almost photorealistic.
Almost photorealistic. Yeah, yeah. I don't know the whole story behind this painting or sale, but it's a curious one to have be the record. I think, but I think, yeah, that's
And
what we're looking at.
the mood of it just seems so odd too.
I'll tell you what, that pig is also really happy too, so that's good.
Yeah. I'm glad the pig is alive and I'm glad the pig is happy.
Right, absolutely. Okay. Oh, this next one is so fun. This is Hands Up, the second all-time highest, auction result for Wyeth. This was sold for around 5 million, I think, right in that neighborhood. And it was from it's a really early one. It's 1906. This is from like one of those, that the travels out west came in handy for this. This was from an article in McClure's about Montana, and it's called Hands Up, and it's some kind of there's a gentleman behind the carriage there with a gun. He's kind of sticking it up. It's like a coach robbery, and that what was I going to say? The thing detail two details about this that I liked was that it was in for a while at least it was in a collection of a bank, the Arizona National Bank of Arizona collection. So I love that that this is the work they own. It's somebody robbing somebody. And this was also part of a pretty significant, in terms of exhibitions. But in the 80s, through once Gorbachev was in the U.S. in charge in the USSR, they it was part of some giant Wyeth exhibition that started in the Soviet Union, um, and it included this painting and a bunch of NC Wyeths, but also Andrew Wyeth and Jamie Wyeth, and so it started in the Soviet Union and went all around the world, um, and this was in that show,
Oh, wow. Wow. So it was, yeah, transmitting American cultural values. So that's
right?
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if the bank was Wells Fargo. That would be really interesting if it was, because the stagecoach is part of their brand identity.
Right, right, right. The bank was called the Valley National Bank of Arizona, whatever that is. Yeah.
Ah, got it. Got it. Thank you for clarifying. And just, I'm again, I like with the light, for anyone who's ever traveled out west, that's exactly what the light looks like when it hits those canyons. And so, yeah, his early travels out west to really soak that up in person provided such a deep education that he was able to keep. I mean, this is an early painting, but he was able to return to those western scenes throughout the rest of his career with that visual memory.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, okay. So I think this is probably our last slide, but this is a called Indian Love Call. And this was sold most recently at Christie's in 2020, October 2020. So this is like sort of pandemic times. And it ended up being the third highest auction result ever for NC Wyeth. Helping it was that it's from the collection of T. Boone Pickens. That's who owned it. And then what did that sell for? $3.5 million. And this is big. It's like muralish. It's like 47 by 70 inches or so. And I don't know. I think it was an original commission. Somebody commissioned it, and it was like in someone's house. I think like a private commission. Um, and this had sold actually. This also sold. The ninth highest selling Wyeth of all time was also this painting because it sold in 2007 uh, for about 1.8 million. And this is late 20s. Another interesting thing about repeat sales, that Wild Bill Hickok. Well, we already addressed that, so I won't. I'll edit that out. We already talked about that.
But I think that's interesting because Wild Bill actually resold for a little bit less, and then this sold for substantially more.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
That's intriguing. That doesn't quite fit the pattern.
Yeah, it does with the pattern. I mean, it's got that, everything was crazy. in October 2020. There's something going on there. I think people were just excited that the market didn't stop completely, and it's got provenance, T. Boone Pickens. Who wouldn't want a piece of T. Boone Pickens history? So who knows?
Yeah.
Um,
It's a
yeah,
really interesting composition.
it really is. Yeah, it's pretty unique. Yeah,
How the canoe mirrors the curve of the top of the canvas, which probably was for whatever, room it was commissioned for with the architecture there.
exactly. And I don't know if this came into play, but it's almost like the sort of it's like a stage setting or something. It's got the way the trees are kind of like these curtains. It's reminding me of I think Cezanne did a couple like bathers with these sort of like trees kind of like framing
Yes.
uh the figures and stuff. I don't know that Wyeth looked at Cezanne, but he could have. Albert Barnes didn't live that far away from him, so maybe that's something to look into. Were they buddies? I don't know.
Good point. Excellent. Well, thank you for the Philadelphia art historical education.
Absolutely. So I think that's our little bite-sized market coverage of the market for NC Wyeth.